The views expressed on the Jerry Cahill CF podcast are that of Jerry Cahill and guests, and not necessarily those of the Boomer Esiason Foundation. Nothing on the Jerry Cahill CF podcast should be considered medical advice. Such advice can only be given by a physician who is experienced with cystic fibrosis. The Boomer Esiason Foundation, Jerry Cahill and guests cannot be held responsible for any damage which may result from using the information on this podcast without the permission of your medical doctor. You're listening to the Jerry Cahill CF podcast presented by the Boomer Esiason Foundation and jerrycahill.com.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Boomer Esiason Foundation's Living, Breathing, Succeeding educational podcast series. This episode, COVID-19, a terrible virus and the wonderful humans who cared for me, was made possible through an unrestricted educational grant from Genentech to the Boomer Esiason Foundation. During these unsettling times with the COVID-19 pandemic, we have the opportunity to chat with Kay, a person with CF that had COVID and recovered. At 59 years of age, Kay is enjoying living on the central coast of California. Her hobbies include drawing, painting, walking, and stand-up paddleboarding. Kay just purchased a new Happy to Be Alive car in celebration of having survived this last year. It's an honor to be speaking with Kay today as she shares her journey with COVID-19 and how she made it through. Hi Kay, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I live in Morro Bay, California. Been here about 6 years. Moved here from the Chicago suburbs. Smartest thing I ever did. And I've started on disability, and I am calling myself an artiste. I love to do art. Back in the day, I went to college for illustration, so it's kind of bringing that back around because I didn't do it for years. And I live in the most beautiful area of the central coast of California, so I get out and walk. I used to do more, adventurous hiking, but I'm happy to walk along the bay and on the beach right now. And I get out and stand up paddleboard on occasion with a little help too.
Let's get right into, this whole COVID thing. How did it start? What were your initial symptoms?
Really, my only symptom that started to concern me, kind of graphic, I was coughing up something that was not normal for me. It was clear and transparent, but solid. And that, after 3 days of having that happen, I was in contact with my physician, and I think perhaps because he was on the alert with COVID, he said, "We want you to come on in." I thought I was having a CF exacerbation. I went in thinking I was going to do a tune-up, maybe spend a few days getting started and come home. But one thing led to another, and on day 2, we decided to go ahead and test me for COVID. And it took 4.5 days to come back. And by then, I was experiencing a lot of other things, and my fever was getting high. And gosh, I don't know. I think it was nearly 5 days into it. I was having to be on oxygen and things like that, which I don't normally need. It was like an effort to take an in-breath and an effort to take an out-breath, like a scratchy, like that. And a nurse was listening to my lungs, and I'm used to going in the hospital and it doesn't sound too bad. But I asked her how it sounded, and she said, "Quite poor." And I was like, "Well, what does that mean?" And she said, "That sound Velcro makes when you tear it apart?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness." And so that is when I really started realizing it was super serious, and my fevers were 104. They were ice packing my body. And I was in intensive care for 5 days. It was serious.
So at this point, how long were you in the hospital for? 6, 7 days?
No, a total of 22 days. I started visualizing my daughter, who's engaged, having grandchildren, having children and being a grandma. And I, started envisioning coming back home to this beautiful place and just being alive and having a few more good years. So, I got through it, and it was tough. And there was a point where I really didn't, I was texting people, "I love you." I wasn't thinking I was going to survive in intensive care there for a few days. When I had the positive test, my doctor came to my window, and we did window calls every day. He did not come in the room except for when I was in intensive care, because it just wasn't necessary. He could stand out there, we could have our conversation. He told me he was going to fight to get me breathing treatments, because there was a concern that when you do a treatment and you exhale the nebulizer, that the virus also becomes even more airborne. And so there was a danger to staff, more so during a breathing treatment. They administered the breathing treatments, and I'm very grateful, because I just wanted to sleep. I don't know that I could have done them myself at that point, Truly, I've always felt gratitude for the hospital staff, but this was kind of over and above. I mean, it wasn't kind of over and above, it was over and above. I mean, we all know how contagious this COVID is, and they knew that pretty early on. And yet, their job is to care for people, and they did it irregardless of their own risk. And they did it with such kindness and caring. My pulmonary function, my spirometry, is back up, my lung volume. But what hasn't gotten back to normal is just my oxygenation. My oxygen sats are okay when I'm up walking around the room, but at night they dip really low when I sleep. So I'm wearing oxygen at night. Didn't need that before COVID, And then just walking. I can walk on flat land, go up a hill, my sats drop. Walk and talk with a friend, I get really winded if I try to talk while I'm walking, so that is different. I think that I'm hopeful that, for someone with CF, it might actually take a full year to recover. So I'm hoping some of that will still improve. And I do want to tell CFers, yes, you need to take all those precautions, but perhaps don't live too much in fear either, because I survived, and I'm 59 years old, and my lung function is not great. I was listed for a transplant previously, and Trikafta's taken me back up the hill a little bit, so I'm not actively listed now. But if I survived, so can they. And so you don't need to live in like a state of fear that prevents you from living, So that would be my advice. Be careful, but don't be so afraid.
We hope you enjoyed the CF podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell on the Boomer Esiason Foundation's YouTube channel, so we can keep you up to date on our latest educational programs for the cystic fibrosis community.